Morning.
Hello. Can you hear me, Milena? Good evening, everyone. Good day, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Hey,
Yes.
hello, everyone. Hello, nice to see you all. So, welcome, everyone, to our day one of our first IMF Congress. I am Mark De Castro, the current IMF president, and we are very happy to have you here. This is actually our second day. Our first day was held last October 9, where we had the Metro chapters. We presented all of the 7 chapters. It was an opportunity for us to get to know the 200 plus fellows. So today we are opening this to the public, to everyone, because we feel the need to discuss further the metropolitan discipline. And today, we will be having distinguished guest speakers from different parts of the globe. So looking forward to have this discussion with you all. So feel free to chime in into the chat if you have questions. Basically, what we'd like to achieve here is to engage as many as possible in the discussions about the metropolitan discipline. This is really very, very important. We are being live streamed in Facebook also. We are also joined by different fellows from the 7 different chapters. We are joined by different participants from different disciplines, professional, academy, and government. So without further ado, I think let's jump in. No? I'd like to welcome you all to our day one of our first IMF Congress. And let us all enjoy this moment and looking forward to our discussions. I think to start with, Milena, by the way, this is hosted by the IMF Latin America chapter and the Central Asia chapter. So before we jump into our program, so just to remind everyone, we will be also having our day two come October 23, and on October 30, we'll also have the day 3. So this is just the beginning. So hope everyone will also be there. Today was on the metro chapters. So may metro sector, metro sectors. So without further ado, maybe let's jump in, Milena. Let's jump into the first session. Where our founder, IMF founder Pedro Ortiz, will be presenting about metro management. We've shared in advance the video, and hope everyone saw it. But for the benefit of those who weren't able to see it, we'll be sharing it for you. And then after this, let's have a lively discussion. Milena, let's share the video. Milena, are you sharing the video?
Just 1 second. Thank you.
Okay, okay. So while Milena is sharing the video, so we'll have a series of discussions. So we'll start with Metro Management, and then after that we'll have the Metro Governance to be presented by Mats Anderson, and then we'll have the Metro Transport be presented by Milena Suarez, and then the Metro Planning by Luis Eduardo Martinez, and then of course Muhammad Parva will be presenting about Metropolitan Heritage. And then we'll have a synthesis, and hopefully we'll have some conclusion leading towards our day 2. Yeah. So I can see a lot of familiar faces here. Gretel, who's I think the very early in your time zone. Danny, from the Philippines, I can see a lot of from the Austronesia chapter. So welcome everyone. Also from the Arabia chapter. Okay, here's the video. Enjoy.
But the institutions involved in metropolitan management have mainly 2 instruments to act in the metropolis, in the city, which are the competence of that government, of the governments that are involved, and the budget, the capacity of metropolitan institutions, or even not a metropolitan institution, but institutions involved in metropolitan management have mainly 2 instruments to act in the metropolis, in the city, which are the competence of that government, of the governments that are involved, and the budget, the capacity of finance of those governments. And people, the institutions that have to decide on how to apply those competencies and how to apply that finance is the representation, the representatives, the people that make the decisions, and in those decisions, those representatives.
Milena, if there's
metropolis, so it's the participation.
Let's I think that let's jump in. I'm not sure if the video is pretty clear. There seems to be some feedback.
Hello.
Hello. I think let's have that. If you don't mind, I think we can proceed with the presentation, Pedro. Let's jump into the discussion. Unless you can have the video clearer, Milena.
I need to ask
Okay,
all of you, sorry, I need to ask all of you, good morning, to mute your mic and do not open the mic. So then we can go straight forward to the video, because there is some interference on this. So I will mute everyone. So we will play the video, and then I will ask you to keep like that, no, because there are some back noise in the video. So we will try once again, please. Thank you.
Yeah.
Of the citizens through their representatives in the decision making of the metropolis. So to make it polemic vision, and so you will remember a mnemotechnic image is the sticks, which is the capacity of a government to implement by law the decisions that are made by that government. with the dialogue with the private sector and the participation of that, but the capacity to final decisions to be implemented, and the finance, which is the carrot, the capacity not only to implement but to stimulate, to foster other decisions by other bodies that are not yours and in which you do not have capacity to impose, but to foster their investments and by a dialogue of common investment. So sticks.
ట్యూబ్లైట్ బంద్ చేస్తుంది అక్కడ ట్యూబ్లైట్.
I am really sorry, everyone. I think Pedro, I'm so sorry. I cannot play the video. I somehow I don't have the control of the screen, or I don't know if any of you can hear something, but I think it's not. And still you.
Okay, Milena, let me control this. Thank you for let's jump into the discussion and let's have the meat of the discussion. It's okay, Milena. Okay, let's start. So anyway, the purpose of this release engagement, that's really given technical difficulties and also the problem. Pedro, are you there?
Yeah, I am here.
Okay, let's have this discussion. So let's make this as informal as possible. Feel free, everyone, to chime in and also let me jump in to our discussion. So everyone, Pedro Ortiz is the man behind all of this. IMF. Personally, I took the course last April, and I was really very interested to learn about the Metropolitan course. So maybe, Pedro, before we dive into the Metropolitan management discussion, I'd like you to, this is very important, this particular section of this Congress, because this will set the foundation. We envision congresses every year that will happen in the different continents and different parts of the globe. So I think it is important to establish the mission and vision of IMF, why we exist, what is the purpose of what we are doing. So Pedro, I'd like to give you some time to share briefly what is your vision, why we exist, why you started IMF, for the benefit of 100 registered participants also at Facebook who are not yet members of the IMF. So yeah, Pedro, the floor is yours, the screen is yours.
I am going to be very short and very straight to the point, no? Well, metropolitan planning and metropolitan discipline is a brand new discipline that only should exist in the last 70 years, which is when metropolis have exploded after the Second World War, no? And we don't yet have that discipline, so we have to build it up. That's the purpose of the IMF, no? There are some academics that are working into that discipline. There are the need from the administrations that have to manage those metropolises, and they are making a mess out of that management, as we can see all over the world. And so we have to build up that discipline, and we are the core, the 200 plus members, people around the world that are concerned and want to work together into building up that discipline. One say that discipline is very complex, because metropolises are cities. They are not as simple as cities. They are as complex as nations, so they have to be managed like nations, and they have aspects of physical control, physical planning, social development, economic promotion and growth, and then all that under the control of the administrations, the institutions, and the governance, no? Most of planners or metropolises are town planners that are involved in metropolitan planning, but they must realize that the change of size makes a completely different discipline. You don't plan a building the same way as you plan a city, or the same way you plan a metropolis. It's a completely different discipline. And as urban planning exists for 170 years, 180 years, we have to build up the new discipline, which is not urban planning. So urban planners try to extrapolate what they know in urban planning to metropolis, and that is wrong. But on top of that, this is just physical, mostly physical, rarely social, or rarely economic very institutional. And obviously the institutions of the metropolis are completely different from the institutions of the cities, and we cannot replicate these issues. So my talk, my presentation, that was in 30 minutes, and already 130 people have seen it on YouTube, and people, something like 30 people, 40 people have downloaded already the report on which this presentation was made. And I have put on the chat, I have put the links to the different reports related to this. My approach was not as much planning, physical planning, that we have been talking about that for 30 years already, but something that no one talks. And I have never heard, neither in academics, neither in professionals, neither in public administration, which is the management, both in what competences must have the metropolises, because most of metropolis which are being now promoted and built up, especially in Latin America, like Bogota or like Buenos Aires and so on, do not understand the complexity of the metropolis, and they are just mentioning physical terms, planning and a bit of that, no? So it's really the competences a metropolis must have. Second, the money a metropolis must have. We had a couple of years ago in New York University a course on metropolitan finance, no? But that's the only course in all academics all around the world that really are dealing with the finance of metropolises. And then finally, what are the institutions required? No, and most of metropolitan proposals are institutions that are confederations, putting the mayors together and let's discuss the metropolitan issues. And we must realize that the mayors don't have the money and don't have the competences to really deal with metropolitan problems. And then there are other alternatives, like having central government, having a delegate, like in France with the department, and we can have a federation. There are several alternatives, and we have discussed that in the video that we were not able to present. No, so at least 120 of you have already seen that video. 30 or 40 have already read the paper, so I am open to the discussion. I have little time to read on the chat the questions, so if Mark, you are reading the question, give the floor to whoever wants to ask or comment, because we are all professionals, so we are in the same stand. We can all comment and ask and discuss, so I am open to that discussion.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Pedro. We actually asked for questions in advance, and there are a number of those who submitted, and maybe, yeah, let's open the floor to the discussion. So everyone, this is really a participative and open dialogue to really understand the dynamics of this new animal, as Pedro mentioned. I'd like to call in Danny. Danny, are you here? Danny Colombo.
Well,
Danny, are you here?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm here, Mark.
Hi,
Can you hear
Danny.
me?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you. So Danny is the lead of the Sub-Sahara chapter, and maybe you post the question directly to Pedro. I think it was a very interesting discussion that we had about your question. Yeah, let's get the ball rolling, Danny.
Yes, we had an initial discussion where it was mainly surrounded on metropolitan governance. And one of the questions that was posed, obviously, was it was mainly relating to Mexico, whereby a lot of municipalities are run by presidents. Obviously, for me, it was the wording that threw me off a bit, but in Mexico, the presidents, it's just another word for a mayor, if I'm correct. And it started a discussion where we were talking about the different kind of governance system, especially for countries that are run as federations, for countries that have federal states. I mean, you've got Mexico, you've got the United States, you've got Nigeria, as is the case here in Africa. So we were now talking about the limitations of the metropolis. There are cases whereby you have a metropolitan area within a metropolitan state, or a metropolitan area within a federal state. You've got a metropolitan area that is a federal state in itself. And you have metropolitan areas that can over-encompass the boundaries of two federal states. And even going on a transnational level, you can have metropolitan areas that over-encompass the boundaries of two nations. So all that necessitates different kind of governing systems. So maybe if Pedro can just elaborate on the different systems of governance, I mean, not just limited as well to federal states, but just in general, the different systems of governance that we have within a metropolitan framework.
Thank you, Danny. Yes, well, you have mentioned 4 typologies, no? And I am going to focus on those 4 typologies, because if I start commenting on all the typologies and each of them, it can take a century. So out of those 4 typologies you mentioned, the first one, when a metropolis is a state, is a federal state in itself, no? That is the best. That is the best, because really the members, the representative of that state, both in the capital, on the parliament of that state, or the governor of that state, is the metropolitan mayor that has to manage the whole metropolis, no? In that kind of situation, the representatives are very legitimate, because they are the outcome of the direct vote from the citizens, though in democratic terms is the best, but generally they don't have as much money as central government. Generally, they have half of the money of central government, or even less, no? And you mentioned Mexico, that's the case of Mexico. General federal states in Mexico have half of the money of central states. So you have more democracy and less money, but that is, for those who really seek for democracy, that's the best solution, because even if you have less money, if you have people that really know the problems of your metropolis, they are going to use that money much better than central state, which is thinking about other things and are not going to be so focused and so good targeting. No? A metropolis within a federal state. You were mentioning Mexico, by the way. The word of mayor in Spanish is alcalde, which is an inheritance of Arab Spain. Alcalde, alcaid, is the chief in Arab, no? And so the Mexicans did not want to use the Arab word inherited from Spanish, and so they put the word president, no? But they are all mayors, and that's a possible. So in Mexico, for instance, Guadalajara, which is 80% of the population, 95% of the state of Jalisco, but the governor of Jalisco doesn't want to be involved with the mess of managing the metropolis. It's the same attitude of many national presidents that do not want to be messed up with managing the metropolis, which is expensive, messy. It's very difficult to solve the problem. So you want, as a politician, to get into problems that are easy to solve. You don't want to get into problems that you are not going to be able to solve. So in that case, the governor of Jalisco looks aside. He doesn't want to get messed with the metropolis. So he creates a confederation of... I think the ones that run the Zoom can shut up all the microphones of everyone. I think that's a possibility within the Zoom technique. So the governor of the state of Jalisco doesn't want to be messed up with managing Guadalajara, so he has created a fake institution called Imeplan that gets the mayors, and they sit around and they discuss, and they have a little bit of money that they share among themselves and so on. That is the same problem mentioned in my video and other papers about national presidents, where the metropolis is sometimes like in Manila, 70% of the GDP of the Philippines is produced by Manila, probably the other 30% by Cebu, no? 70% is produced by Manila, and the president doesn't want to get messed up with Manila. So he creates a kind of metropolitan body that doesn't solve and so on. So that is a problem of really the population asking the presidents to realize that the metropolis is the core of the production of the country, is not a metropolitan problem, is a national problem. If the nation doesn't have a metropolis that works, the nation will not exist, will not be present globally. All global networks are produced through the metropolises, not through the national governments. So the economics and the relations, economic relations around the world. So really it's a national issue, and the national president, or in this case, the federal governor of the state of Jalisco, should take in hands their responsibility instead of running away. About metropolises that go across two federal states, what you have to do is to go to see who is in control, who is above those two federal states. When you have a conflict between two ministries, two ministers in a government, the Minister of Housing and the Minister of Roads, who is responsible to coordinate those two ministers? Obviously the president, the chief of the cabinet. So when you have a metropolis that runs across two federal states, then the guy responsible is the upper level. If those two federal states are not able to work together for that metropolitan development. In my case, in Madrid, I was in charge of Madrid, which is a federal metropolis. Well, let's call it that way, a federal state in itself. But the metropolis of Madrid goes beyond the borders of the federal state of Madrid into Guadalajara and Toledo. And there is no institutional framework to coordinate that. But what I did is, in an informal way, I had once a month lunch with the director general of those states. No, one month he paid, the other month I paid the lunch, and we tried to organize ourselves with these conflicts and to make the decisions that then every one of us in our competences we will work out in a coordinated way. No, and I can give you examples of well-coordinated things that highways, trains that go beyond the borders of the metropolis of Madrid and are coordinated with the extension of that metropolis in the state of Castilla-La Mancha. And then over two nations, that's even more complex. So when there is two nations that have a common metropolis, either you have that kind of informal network, the two nations get together and are able to organize themselves, no? Or in the case of Europe, we have transnational urban regions, no? Transnational regions in Europe, and there is a procedure of organizing those transnational regions, but that's done by Europe, and Europe is above the nations of Europe, but is a confederation. So Europe does not have the capacity to govern, because a confederation, the sovereignty is on the members of the confederation, not on the confederation. If the sovereignty is on the confederation, then it's not anymore a confederation, it's a federation. No, so in Europe, which is still a confederation, and that's why Brexit, England can leave, and Greece and so on. In Europe, we have a setting trying to organize those transnational regions that, and obviously metropolis as well, they put money and they try to set up a kind of common discussion table for those transnational regions to be able to share the problems and to address the issues. But let's not forget that that kind of putting a table to talk is a confederation, because each member of the table is sovereign of its own decision. And confederations are not the way to run countries. No, confederations have all failed in history. So we must find an upper body able to coordinate the issues and not just be a piecemeal of small decisions addressing small problems. No? And that is the real challenge we have. And that is what we have to solve in the next 10 or 15 years if we don't want to follow up the mess we are now suffering. No? Thank you, Danny.
Thank you so much, Pedro. I fully agree, and the Actually, the extremes are you mentioned about when a metropolitan area is a state and a country in itself. So an example is Singapore, right? And you mentioned about Manila, the case of Manila. So we have the challenge right now. It seems that in the case of Cebu, it's the best case scenario right now is a confederation, which is a mistake right now. So maybe before I turn over to the floor for some other questions, what would you advise? I think that the case that you mentioned in what you did in Madrid, where you initiated, you did some to set up that discussion table, even though you don't have that institutional setup yet. What would you advise for other metropolises where you don't have you're unable to do that because of politics and all, plus you don't have the institutional setup? What's the option?
First thing, for me, the example is Germany. In Germany and well, in Spain, the issue is that our constitutions are very new because we had a dictator, the dictator died. So in Spain, the constitution is from 1978. So we already had the Metropolitan phenomenon, and then we created Madrid as a kind of federal state. No, in Germany, the constitution is from 1949, after the Second World War. So they had a dictator, they had a war, and the constitution is quite new. So they realized that they had the Metropolitan phenomenon, and then they adapted. The contrary case is Colombia. In Colombia, they had a constitution in 1991. And the purpose of the constitution is to make Bogota not work. They thought, they were afraid of the power of Bogota, and in the constitution that prevented Bogota becoming a metropolis. And it's forbidden to Bogota to become a metropolis. Now they have changed the constitution, but they are in trouble because they have changed it through a procedure which is not the legal one, and so on and so on. So you see, the best way is to have a constitutional change and then accept that the metropolis should be states on themselves in federal states. The problem there is that we have three types of countries. The countries where the metropolis is 5% of the GDP of the country, and there are several metropolises with that 5%, and that's the case of China, that's the case of Italy, that's the case of Germany, that's the case of the USA. And so in the countries where the metropolises are 5%, 6% of the GDP of the country, there is not really a political problem for those metropolises to organize themselves and to be competitive. On the other extreme, when in a country the metropolis is 70% of the GDP of the country, which is Manila, which is Cairo, which is Buenos Aires, and so on, it will be impossible for the national government to give political power, to give an institution to the metropolis, because then the mayor of the metropolis that runs 70% of the GDP of the country, next day he will tell the president, go home, because I am really the actual president of the country, because I'm running 70% of the GDP, and you are only running 30%. So why don't you go home and let me run the country? And that is impossible. And in between, you have the 30% range, which is London, which is Paris, which is Madrid, which is that kind of in between. And then you have to work with the two extremes, no? Which is either the president takes charge of the metropolis because it's 70% of the GDP of the country, or you let the metropolises be run like a federal system with states, no? And in all these countries, in England, in France, and in Spain, we have found, in France especially, because the French are very special. Whatever the French do is fine, but it works only in France. And the English are in trouble because the Brexit was the vote of England against London, no? So the problems of London, and now today in the news, the problems of Northern Ireland and the problems of Johnson breaking the treaty with Europe and so on, that is really a mess, no? So they will have to revise all that, no? But in London, they created the Greater London, where the boroughs are the subsystem, the administrative system of the municipalities. But you see, in that kind of case, it is more complex, but that's not generally the case in the countries which are developing right now. You either have the metropolis, which is the big GDP of the country, and then the political problems we mentioned, or a country with many metropolises, and then it's easy to provide those metropolises with the competences necessary to govern and to manage themselves.
Thank you, Pedro. Very interesting insights. Yeah, let's turn over to the floor. Another question came from Monica Hibbert. Are you here, Monica Hibbert? I'd like to give you the opportunity to share your question personally. Hello, Monica. Nice to see you. Yeah, please shoot.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to talk with you. My question is that my question is that our country in our country, each city of the different metropolitan areas has its own president, and when the metropolis is formed,
Monica,
the president,
can you shut down your radio because there is noise behind you?
That radio is not mine.
Sorry, Sumia.
I don't know. Sumia is. Oh,
Yes.
thank you. I'm going to repeat the question.
Yeah.
My doubt is that in our country, each city of the different metropolitan areas has its own president, and when the metropolis is formed, the president continues to govern their own city, and they don't agree to establish to metropolitan policies, which is possible to establish a methodology in a single mandate.
Yeah. Well, Monica, in Mexico, it's fake metropolises. No. First of all, the national government some time ago said, I am going to put money to develop metropolises. And then everyone wanted to be a metropolis because if there were money, they all wanted. So in Mexico, really, you have 6 metropolises, 5, 6, or 7. And now officially you have 48, I think, no? Because everyone wants to be a metropolis. Second, that money that the government promised, it was 1,000. Then they approved 100, and they gave to each metropolis 10. So it was really a fake metropolitan policy, and then most of those metropolises are fake metropolises. They are not. No. Third, those metropolises are confederations because they are formed out of the municipalities that become that are members of the metropolis. So that's what it doesn't work. My message is that confederations do not work. No. Because in the confederations, they have little money. Every municipality is thinking about their own benefits. The mayor of the main city is the president of the metropolis, but he thinks he's the emperor of the metropolis. He's there to tell everyone else to do what he wants. The other mayors hate him, and they don't want to do that. And then he is thinking about his city instead of thinking about the metropolis. So this is the example of how things should not be done and how things do not work. What you should have is the governors of the different federal states take charge of that metropolis and realize that it's the main engine of economic, social, and physical issues in their state, and really run those metropolis with their federal government money, which is something like 20 times more than the municipalities, 20 times more. So really, the municipalities do not have the money to address the metropolitan issues. It should be the states of Mexico that run that. And doing it, if they don't want to be in front of that messy situation, they can always delegate. Like in France, they have the préfet, no? In France, the president puts a préfet in front of a department to organize and to coordinate the different ministries that are investing in that department. So if the governor does not want to be in front of the metropolis because he's going to be splashed with the dirt of the metropolis, can you your microphone down? Thank you. if the governor doesn't want, he can always put a delegate that can be a governor or someone like that to coordinate the secretaries of the government of the federal state, to coordinate the investment that those secretaries are doing in all the different areas of that metropolis. So that will be my suggestion for Mexico. But obviously there are political interests not to do that, and that's why the metropolis of Mexico are a mess, like, for example, Mexico City, Guadalajara, or even Monterrey. No? Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Very interesting insights. I'd like to also call in Babalola, who also shared her advanced question. Babalola, are you here? Babalola? Are you here? So while we wait, Babalola, can you hear me? I'd like to give you the opportunity to share your question personally. Is she here? Anyway, while we're waiting for Babalola, so just like to read some comments. So thank you to Dr. Montalvo for correcting. So Pedro, it's not 70% for Manila, it's 33%. Does that change anything? You mentioned that.
First, we are not talking about Manila City. We are talking about Manila Metropolis, no?
Metro Manila.
And it might not be 70%, but I will not accept anything under 60%.
Thank you for that. Just quickly reading through, IMF needs to work with academe. We are doing that. We have formed the task force for academe, and we're actually developing the Metropolitan core. So we'll be launching that soon. There's need to focus on urban planning. Yes, we support that. As mentioned by Pedro earlier. Rashid Garcia mentioned talking about Mexico.
About urban planning, let me say,
sure,
Mark,
yeah.
It's a question of levels, no? You have different scales. You have the architectural scale, which is 150, the urban design scale, which is 1,500, the urban planning 1,500, and the metropolitan planning 150,000. And all those scales, and it goes beyond that, all those scales have to dialogue among themselves. And you cannot make a metropolitan plan with the precision of an urban plan. That would be crazy. And that's what general urban planners that do metropolitan planning do. They go into doing a metropolitan plan that will look like an urban plan. And that is extremely wrong. So metropolitan planning has to be the framework of the big structures, no? The structural framework of the metropolis in terms of transport, in terms of environment, in terms of housing, productive activities, industry, commerce, and offices, and in terms of social facilities, hospitals, universities, and all that. No, that is the structural framework. But then each of those municipalities need to do their urban plan following those structural patterns. No, so not like in countries where the municipalities can do whatever they want because they have so much autonomy that they don't care who is on top of that. So they do things which are incompatible ones with the others, no, and confronting. But urban planning is absolutely necessary as a complement to metropolitan planning because it's the second scale. Like then urban design, when you in an area of a city, you decide to have a special intervention, you do urban design, and then obviously in every plot of the city, and especially those which are institutionals, and the buildings have to have a representation, an ideological and a symbolic representation of society. That architecture has to be complement to the whole feeling and concept of the metropolis. All that capacity to dialogue is called collective intelligence. In a country where the system of values is well knitted down and people understand each other and have a common purpose, is the system of values, then you have that collective intelligence and things can be coordinated in such a good way, you know?
Thank you, Pedro. Yes, that's very important. We have time for one more question, and I'm seeing here a question from Rashid Garcia. Rashid, feel free to jump in if you want to ask your question personally. Basically, He's saying, is there an ideal proportion of the distribution of the budget in federal states?
It's the answer, Rashid, is so long that I suggest that you read one of the papers there that I pointed out at the beginning of the chat, no? The one that relates to metropolitan finance, no? You cannot have an ideal that like a stamp you put on everyone, but you have general frameworks, no? And I would say that the budget of a metropolis and the municipalities within that metropolis, both budgets together, should be 30% of the metropolis. It's explained there. It's 30 pages paper, so you have there 30 pages to read, but it's 13%. So it will be easy to in a metropolis of 1 million people, no? If that the GDP of that metropolis is $10,000 per capita, then 1 million multiplied by 10,000 is $10 trillion, no? Sorry, $10 billion. $10 billion. So 13% of $10 billion should be the accumulated budget of the municipalities and the metropolis. But obviously this is not a fix. In some places, like in China, is 4 times that. Because in China, the municipalities and the metropolis have a lot of money, no? In other places is just a fraction of that. So it depends on the political framework and the ideology of the country and the purpose of the national government and the share with the local governments and so on. Each country is different. But I have at the end of that report, of that paper, there is a table showing the GDPs of the capitals of many countries and what really the budget of those capitals are. And you see how in France, they are above that figure, but in other countries, they are very much below that figure, and then make your own criteria and decide for yourself.
Thank you, Pedro. We have 3 minutes for this session. Before we transfer to this next session to Matt Anderson's presentation on metro governance, I'd like to give this an opportunity, Pedro. There's a question here from Dr. Murad. Is metropolitan plan equivalent to regional planning?
No, not at all. Not at all, because a region is a region with the agricultural structure, many municipalities which are not part of a metropolis. A metropolis is a specific region, no? When I went to study to England, to Oxford, there was no metropolitan planning major. There was only regional planning major, and I have already done in Spain urban planning major, so I decided to do the regional one. But if you know regional planning and you know urban planning, it will be easier to understand metropolitan planning because it's the mix of two, no? But is a different approach, no? Because we are dealing, you know, the definition of a metropolis is a set of urban units that share a significant daily commuting, no? And a region does not need to have a daily commuting. So a metropolis is much more dense, is much more complex, it has much more interrelated, is a system in itself, no? And it has to work like a system. And the main difference between urban and metropolis is that in terms of ecology and environment, is that in a city, the environment is outside of the city. The city is growing and the environment is outside of the city. And in metropolitan planning, the environment is part of the metropolis because the cities should not merge. You should prevent mergence of the cities because that is the metastasis of the metropolis. You should prevent that mergence. And then the environment goes in between those cities and it has to be protected because it's part of the agricultural system related. The urban rural, now very fashionable, UN Habitat is doing a lot of work on specifically on that, not in other things that need as well work, but they are working a lot on urban rural. And that is the urban rural relation of within the metropolis, and then the parks, not only agricultural, social facilities that really require to be on the border of a city because they benefit for the contact with the quality of the environment. I'm thinking of hospitals, universities, sports playgrounds, things like that, and that is part of the framework of the metropolis, and not in a city, because for a city the environment is outside. In a metropolis, the environment is essential part of the metropolis.
Okay, thank you, Pedro. We have other questions, but I think we can go back to them later on. Thank you, Pedro, for so much for this session. Please stay with us. Of course, I will continue our discussion later. So now we move over to our discussion on metro governance. Matt,